Welcome back to the channel. Just 72 hours ago, on April 28, 2026, the world woke up to satellite imagery that should have been on every front page of every newspaper in the Western world, but was buried beneath celebrity scandals and stock market chatter by an editorial class that has lost the ability to distinguish between what is important and what is entertaining. China's People's Liberation Army Navy conducted the largest peacetime naval exercise in the history of the South China Sea, deploying over 120 warships, 47 submarines, and more than 300 combat aircraft across an operational area stretching from the Paracel Islands to the Spratly Archipelago, a zone encompassing over 3.5 million square kilometers of contested water. On this channel, we do not just read the headlines, we read the water. And what the water is telling us right now is that the endgame for the South China Sea has begun, and it will not end the way Washington thinks it will. I made a prediction on this channel 14 months ago. I said China would execute a military demonstration around Taiwan that would stop short of invasion, but would fundamentally alter the strategic calculus for every nation in the Western Pacific. That prediction was confirmed within 8 months. The demonstration came, the calculus changed. Japan tripled its defense budget. The Philippines reversed course on its basing agreements. Australia committed to nuclear submarine acquisition. And the United States discovered to its institutional horror that deterrence in the Taiwan Strait was no longer a matter of showing the flag with a carrier transit, but required a permanent, ruinously expensive force posture that the American military-industrial complex was not sized, not funded, and not psychologically prepared to sustain. Now I am making another prediction. The South China Sea, that 3.5 million square kilometer theater of blue water, coral reefs, and contested sovereignty, will be functionally under Chinese maritime control within 36 months. Not through invasion, not through a dramatic military confrontation that gives Washington the crisis it needs to rally domestic support. Through the quiet, relentless, incremental accumulation of military infrastructure, Coast Guard presence, fishing fleet dominance, and legal diplomatic positioning that China has been perfecting for 15 years. Stay with us because the evidence will change how you see the entire Indo-Pacific. If you want raw, no-filter analysis that cuts through the noise, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop your comments below. The South China Sea is not just water. It is the arterial highway of global commerce, a liquid superhighway through which approximately $5.3 trillion in trade passes annually, representing roughly 1/3 of all global shipping. The sea lanes connecting the Strait of Malacca to the ports of Shanghai, Shenzhen, Tokyo, and Seoul carry the manufactured goods, the raw materials, the energy supplies, and the food shipments that keep the economies of East Asia alive. Control the South China Sea, and you hold the economic jugular of half the planet in your fist. And China has been closing that fist, finger by finger, for 2 decades, while the West debated pronouns and climate pledges. The military infrastructure China has built across the Spratly and Paracel Islands is not a collection of research stations with colorful flags, no matter what the official Chinese diplomatic line claims. It is a network of forward operating bases, unsinkable aircraft carriers made of coral and concrete, equipped with 3,000-meter airstrips capable of handling every aircraft in the PLA Air Force inventory, hardened hangars, fuel storage, ammunition bunkers, point defense weapons, and, most critically, HQ-9B long-range surface-to-air missile batteries with engagement ranges exceeding 200 kilometers and YJ-62 anti-ship cruise missile launchers with ranges exceeding 400 kilometers. Fiery Cross Reef, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef together form a triangle of overlapping air defense and anti-ship coverage that creates a contested zone encompassing virtually the entire southern portion of the South China Sea. Any naval vessel or aircraft entering this zone without Chinese authorization is tracked, classified, and held at risk from the moment it crosses the engagement boundary. The United States Navy still transits these waters under freedom of navigation operations. But the transit is no longer a demonstration of dominance. It is a request for permission disguised as a show of force. And both sides know it. The PLA Navy itself has undergone a transformation that the Western defense establishment has consistently underestimated, mischaracterized, and willfully ignored. China now operates over 370 commissioned warships, a fleet numerically larger than the United States Navy for the first time since World War II. The Type 055 Renhai-class guided missile cruiser, a 13,000-ton surface combatant carrying 112 vertical launch cells, is the most heavily armed surface warship built by any navy since the Kirov-class battle cruisers of the Soviet era. China has commissioned 8 of them. The Type 052D Luoyang III class destroyers, armed with 64 VLS cells carrying HHQ-9 air defense missiles and YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles, number over 25 hulls. The submarine fleet includes 6 Type 094A Jin-class ballistic missile submarines carrying JL-3 submarine-launched ballistic missiles with ranges exceeding 10,000 kilometers, 12 Type 039A Yuan-class diesel-electric attack submarines that operate with noise levels approaching those of advanced Western designs, and at least 6 Type 093A Shang-class nuclear attack submarines. This is not a coastal defense force. This is a blue water navy designed, built, and deployed for one purpose: to establish and defend maritime dominance over the waters that China considers its sovereign territory. The exercise that took place on April 28th was not a training drill. It was a proof of concept demonstration. The operational scenario, reconstructed from open source intelligence and commercial satellite tracking, involved the simultaneous deployment of carrier strike groups centered on the Shandong and the Fujian, China's 2 operational aircraft carriers, supported by a screen of Type 055 cruisers and Type 052D destroyers, with an undersea component of at least 12 submarines dispersed across the exercise zone. The air component included J-15 carrier-based fighters, J-20 stealth fighters operating from island airstrips, Y-8Q maritime patrol aircraft conducting anti-submarine warfare operations, and, for the first time observed publicly, WZ-7 Soaring Dragon high-altitude reconnaissance drones operating in coordinated formations with manned aircraft. The exercise simulated the establishment of an exclusion zone across the entirety of the South China Sea, south of the 16th parallel, with live fire engagements against drone targets simulating incoming cruise missiles and surface threats. The message was unmistakable. China was not practicing defense. China was practicing control. In Washington, the reaction in the halls of the Pentagon was the institutional equivalent of a man discovering that the lock on his front door no longer works. The U.S. 7th Fleet, headquartered in Yokosuka, Japan, is the primary American naval force in the Western Pacific. It currently operates approximately 50 to 60 ships, including 1 forward-deployed carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, several guided missile cruisers and destroyers, and a submarine force whose exact composition is classified. Against China's 370-ship navy operating in its own backyard, within range of shore-based missile batteries, under the umbrella of integrated air defense systems, and with interior supply lines that stretch hundreds of kilometers rather than thousands, the 7th Fleet's numerical disadvantage is compounded by a geographic disadvantage so severe that wargame simulations conducted by the RAND Corporation and the Center for Strategic and International Studies have repeatedly concluded that the United States cannot win a conventional naval conflict in the South China Sea without sustaining losses that would be politically and strategically unsurvivable. These are not fringe assessments. These are conclusions generated by America's own defense establishment using America's own wargaming infrastructure, and they have been consistently ignored by a political class that finds the implications too uncomfortable to confront publicly. In Tokyo, the Japanese self-defense forces are quietly expanding their southwestern island chain defenses, deploying Type 12 anti-ship missile batteries to Okinawa, Miyako, and Ishigaki, a defensive archipelago designed to slow but not stop a Chinese advance toward the first island chain. In Manila, the Philippine government is navigating the impossible tightrope between its security alliance with Washington and its economic dependence on Beijing, a dependence that grows deeper every year as Chinese investment, Chinese infrastructure loans, and Chinese trade volumes increasingly dominate the Philippine economy. In Canberra, the Australian defense establishment is accelerating its AUKUS submarine program with an urgency driven by the dawning realization that the nuclear submarines Australia will not receive until the mid-2030s at the earliest may arrive too late to matter. In Hanoi, Vietnam, which has its own territorial disputes with China in the Paracels and Spratlys, is conducting the quietest and most consequential diplomatic hedging operation in Southeast Asia, maintaining military cooperation with Washington while simultaneously deepening economic ties with Beijing and refusing to commit to either side in a confrontation that Vietnam recognizes it cannot influence and cannot survive. In Beijing, the strategy is patient, methodical, and operates on timescales that Western democracies, with their 4-year election cycles and quarterly earnings reports, cannot match. China does not need to fight for the South China Sea. China needs to build in the South China Sea. Build islands, build runways, build radar stations, build missile batteries, build Coast Guard stations, build fishing fleet infrastructure, until the accumulated weight of physical presence creates a reality that no diplomatic protest, no freedom of navigation operation, and no alliance communique can reverse. This is the salami slicing strategy, and it is the most successful territorial expansion strategy of the 21st century. Each individual slice is too small to justify a military response. The accumulated effect of 1,000 slices is the transfer of sovereignty from the legal claimants to the physical occupier, and the physical occupier is China. First, the South China Sea is no longer contested in any meaningful military sense. It is dominated. China's combined naval, air, missile, and island-based capabilities create a layered defense architecture that the United States cannot penetrate in a conventional conflict without accepting losses measured in carriers and thousands of sailors. Second, the window for reversing China's physical occupation of the Spratlys and Paracels closed approximately 5 years ago, when the island bases achieved operational capability with hardened runways, missile batteries, and radar installations. Tearing down those bases would require an act of war that no American president will authorize. Third, the real competition in the South China Sea is no longer military. It is economic and institutional. China is building the trade relationships, the infrastructure dependencies, and the multilateral frameworks that will formalize its dominance through commercial gravity rather than military force. Fourth, the United States faces a strategic choice that it has been deferring for a decade and can no longer avoid. Either commit to a permanent military presence in the Western Pacific at a scale and cost that will consume the defense budget for a generation, or accept that the South China Sea is transitioning from an American-guaranteed commons to a Chinese-managed space and restructure alliances accordingly. The old Pacific is dying. The Pacific where American carriers sailed wherever they pleased, where freedom of navigation was an American gift bestowed upon grateful nations, where the rules of the sea were American rules enforced by American steel. That Pacific is being replaced by a new Pacific, where the largest navy belongs to China, where the most extensive island infrastructure belongs to China, where the deepest trade relationships run through Beijing rather than Washington, and where the nations of Southeast Asia are hedging, adapting, and quietly aligning their futures with the power that builds rather than the power that patrols. The endgame is not a battle. The endgame is an accounting. And in that accounting, the country that invested in concrete, in coral, in ports, in pipelines, and in trade will outlast the country that invested in carrier transits and press releases. What do you think is the endgame? Can America hold the Pacific, or has the transition already passed the point of no return? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this analysis opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay sharp.